Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, my name's Stefania Chaplin. I am based in London. It's actually one of my favorite things about the virtual world is, hey, I can be in the Pacific Northwest right now from the comfort of my own home. So today I'm going to be talking about starting left with cloud security. My name is Stefania Chaplin. I am a solutions architect EMEA at Secure Code Warrior. You can find me on Twitter, DevStepOps. I also have YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. So let's get started. Agenda. So what are we going to talk about today? So I'll take you on a little bit of a history lesson all the way back to 20 years ago, what the world was like, looking at the growth of cloud and also infrastructure as code. And with this growth, with great power comes great responsibility. Comes security vulnerabilities. I talk about this sometimes because when I Googled that phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, who said it better? Ben Parker, Peter Parker's dad, or Voltaire, the French philosopher, depending on where you're coming from. Anyway, so the thing about security is whether it's cloud, whether it's application, networking, even physical security, it is a shared responsibility. And I'm going to go into that, in a bit of depth. And then looking at the actual provisioning, so infrastructure as code, how we can apply the same DevOps methodologies that we've learned to love to the infrastructure as code space. The explosion of CloudSec, and I do really mean that, it's almost mind-boggling how much is going on in the industry. Like, it's awesome, I love it, but I have a passionate interest in this, so I try and keep ahead of things. But I always wonder what happens if you've got many things to look after, and I'm going to talk about some of those. Why shift left when you can start left? Got some great graphs to talk through. And then finally, cloud security training within an optimal security program. So let's rewind. We're going to go back in time. 20 years ago. Okay, so turn of the millennium. I have an idea. Like I'm working in tech, and I'm like, I want to test something. I want to try something out. I've got some initiative. Ooh, do I have any compute? Okay, the data center. Do I have a spare server? Ooh, don't have any spare compute available. Okay, I'll get one. Okay, but is there space in the racks? Like, do I have enough cooling? Do I have enough power? One of my ex-colleagues used to work at a bank in the UK, and they were literally, I can't remember the word, but they were attached to the national power grid. So they literally couldn't get any more power even if they wanted to, but that's the extent that it used to be like. And okay, we've got some space. There's the little slot. I'm going to reserve it for my server. So we've got the power and the cooling, nice. How about the network engineer? Someone to go in with a little screwdriver and put everything in place. Is he around? It's coming up to summer in Europe. So is he on holiday? Like what's going on? And oh yeah, I need to get this server. The reality is probably going to come from far away, and it's probably going to come on a ship. So it's not like I can't just magic a server. And so what you would find from I've got an idea, and then I obviously have to get approval for the actual idea, but I also have to get approval for all the things I've just listed. So that can add 4 to 6 months, maybe, delay, lag time. Not ideal. Then what we started to see, I think around kind of 2013, was Vagrant. So HashiCorp Vagrant app. And this was really cool because all of a sudden, virtualization. So it meant that you could kind of partition and provision within the actual servers, additional machines. It was quite computer intensive. You don't want to have too many VMs running, as I'm sure people listening probably know. But hey, all of a sudden you can cut down a process from months to minutes. Wow, how awesome is that? To the point that I used to work with someone who, in a previous life, when Vagrant Up was, was new, his boss thought he was lying, that he had managed to cut down the process from months to minutes by using virtualization. And then we moved to kind of modern day, or originally I think it was 2014, the first version of Terraform, but now infrastructure as code is everywhere, and it's awesome. You know, we can codify, you know, resources, no more, you know, waiting in queues or backlogs. We can literally just type what we want, hit enter, presuming we have the correct permissions to, you know, provision these. But there is a bit of a caveat, because now a single mistake affects thousands of servers. So I was working at a company a while ago, and I like to hang out in the engineering Slack channel. It's one of my favorite places. It's where all the cool kids are, you know, because, you know, just to see what's up and coming, what's going on. Sometimes I even, you know, wander around the Jira tickets as well. But anyway, I was working at this organization, and I see this graph. And it's, I don't know which is left and right, but, you know, in the past, it was really, really high, and then it goes down to being really, really low in the kind of modern. It's like, it's almost like a cliff face. And in the comment of the screenshot of this graph, it said, so blah blah and myself have gone and done some investigation into, you know, our AWS bill. It turned out there was a misconfigured EKS, so that's Kubernetes. And what was happening was it was trying to, you know, launch and then falling and trying. And because it was just looping and rolling, what it said in the comment is we've now fixed the issue, and we have cut our AWS bill from $6,000 a month to $1,000. So that's the thing. I'm going to talk a lot about security, but it's not even just security. It's kind of, it could also be cost, which is why it's very important. I'm going to touch on it, the importance of our monitoring team and, you know, threat incident response, etc. Because that's, you know, I don't think anyone wants to be paying 6 times more than they need to on anything. So it's really, although we've got all these awesome abilities, you know, now that we can, you know, provision, we can fail fast, we can build fast, we can, you know, do everything, but we have to be very mindful. Who's doing what? You know, what is possible? Oh, are we doing it right? So, talking a little bit about the growth of cloud and infrastructure as code. So as part of researching for this talk, I spoke to a lot of different thought leaders in the industry, you know, read a lot of the internet, and spoke to a lot of people. And then when I had my abstract ready, I read it to my mum, who is non-technical. She used to be a stockbroker like in the 80s, but yeah, not a cloud security person. And I asked her, well, I read her the abstract, which is a bit technical. I wasn't expecting her to understand that. But once I was done, she looked a little confused, but I said, Mummy, do you know what cloud is? And she said, it's where my photos are stored on someone else's computer. And I was like, do you know what, Mummy? I will give you that one. That is actually a fairly accurate description. And even if we think back 5 or 10 years ago, would your average, you know, C-suite been able to give something, you know, as succinct? So, and that's the point. It's now so ubiquitous that even, you know, people, not even like, well, we're all users of the cloud, but, you know, non-technical, you know, I also asked my friends, do you know what cloud is? And yeah, lots of references to photos and files, you know, but that's the thing. Cloud is now ubiquitous, and we're really seeing that in growth. So I pulled these stats. This was, I think it was mid-April. So it was after all the quarterly numbers got announced. And AWS, so this is annualized. So sorry, this is based on quarterly growth from the previous quarter, but 32% growth, 13.5 billion, quite a big number. And similarly, other main players, Microsoft, Google, GCP, 50%, 46%. These are huge numbers. This is what you normally see in, you know, startups. This is what you aim for. But to have that, obviously these are big players, and this is obviously a side, you know, a portion of their business. It's not the whole of, you know, Amazon, but it just shows how much cloud is growing. And I think especially, you know, with, you know, people storing photos, etc., businesses, you've got hybrid models. It used to be a case where if you know, say 5-10 years ago, it was like, oh, I don't know if I want to put my, as an organization, not as a person, oh, I don't know if I want to put my stuff in the cloud. But now, if you're not in the cloud, you're running a bit behind. You know, we're all in the cloud in one way, shape, or another. And I'm even starting to see it kind of turn the other way, in that obviously everyone's going to cloud. But when I speak to some of the most technical people I know, they've actually, someone I know is playing around with EKS, but they don't really want to pay $40 a month just to have it there whilst they tinker around. So then they bought a Raspberry Pi so that they can have EKS on the Pi. So we're actually, certain people are now moving to hardware. So it's kind of, I'm not saying everyone's going to be on Raspberry Pis, but it's just interesting, how it's moving for different people. So with great power comes security vulnerabilities. And this is the thing, with this awesome growth, hackers, they're going to like, oh, I can see things are growing there. And also cloud migration projects tend to be quite big. Everyone will try and do them to the best of their ability. But, new vectors are coming out every day, and it's all, developers are very, very intelligent people. And, hackers I sometimes think of as, developers gone bad, because they obviously have to have an understanding of what's going on. So we're just kind of trying to stay ahead, and you're starting to see, quite a few different types of common vulnerabilities. So these are your like pitfalls to avoid. So misconfigured cloud storage. You don't have to Google too far to, have a, I think it's leaky S3 bucket or a public S3 bucket. So I'm AWS certified, and when I started my course, bucket S3 buckets, so that's your storage, they were public by default, and that was great. And then I think I had about 6 months off because I had change of priorities, but came back. I'm a thorough person. I was like, right, I'm going to start again from the beginning, because I'd only done the S3 section, so I wasn't repeating too much. I'm glad I did, because then when I came back 6 months later, all of a sudden S3 buckets are private by default. And there's a couple of reasons I think that's happened. So for one of them, as I mentioned, there are I'm not going to name shame. There are quite a few, a couple of financial institutions that may have got a bit, bitten by having a public S3 bucket. I also read, I can't remember the companies involved. I think it was tech. I don't know if it was tech or finance, but one company was suing another for, stealing its IP. And then it turns out the stolen IP was just on a public S3 bucket. So it was public. Is it stolen? So anyway, what we're starting to see is, AWS and the other cloud providers are listening, and seeing these potential security pitfalls. What's worth noting is sometimes you don't always want to have your buckets private. If I'm hosting a website, I have a website and it's all about DevStepOps, and it's got all my conferences, and I want to put my little tile up with like, hey, this is what I'm talking about. I probably want that to be public, because if I want people on devstepops.com to access the site, I want them to be able to see, the picture. So it's very important to understand what can be public and what can be private. And that goes into as well, general data, PII sensitive information, etc. So poor access management. This is kind of an interesting one, because there's a couple of different angles. And I think we've all gotten to the point, or I hope so, where when we are setting up, say an organization, even stuff like setting up, I don't know, Google Drive, folder access, I'm sure in all organizations, HR have access to, people's contracts, but you don't want everyone in the company to have access. So we have an understanding of permissions and privileges, and, I think most people understand that. And then when you get to tech, it gets a little bit more complicated, because something, for example, in AWS, something very popular is called Lambda. Lambda is, I always pronounce it wrong, ephemeral? I think that's the one. Anyway, it comes and goes. It is created, and then it does what it needs to do, and it goes. Any Rick and Morty fans, I think of it like Mr. Meeseeks. So it will come, it will do the task required, and then it disappears happily. The thing is, these lambdas can have quite powerful permissions sometimes. So, for example, if someone were to intercept that lambda as it was doing its little function, maybe it only lasts 30 seconds. But if someone gets it at that time, or if it's doing 30 seconds every day at the same time, for example, if we can intercept that, it's like, oh, that lambda can actually create EC2 instances, so it can create servers. That lambda, oh, it can also do this. And for example, sometimes you might have systems, and in this lambda, maybe it's running, a Docker container. Ooh, someone left that Docker logged in as root. Oops. So it's, there's a lot more to think about. It's not just like having, your file structure with your contracts and your HR. You really need to think of the cloud and think about the different resources, not only, what people have access to what, so there's a whole identity access management, but also what resources have access to what, because guess what? Computers can do things. You don't want to accidentally have a Lambda that then creates a massive expensive server that hosts, 1,000 crypto miners or anything like that. The other one worth noting, I didn't put it in here, but I'm not going to say it links to access management, but around security groups. So a security group is, you're basically saying who can access this computer and how. So is it HTTP? Or HTTPS? Is it SSH? Etc. And I've had it because sometimes, and this is only on my personal cloud, never ever on the corporate, but if I'm like in Docker and I'm in a our laptops, I have to use a Linux container. So I'm in Docker in Linux on Chrome OS. It's a lot of layers of abstraction, and I'm just trying to figure out where my IP is. Honestly, there are about 7 different commands I could run, and obviously the 7th one worked. But as I was exploring, trying to find my IP, security groups. So you can set them, to which IP you want, and it's not working. I'm like, I can't access it, and I'm like, is it me? Is it the IP I selected, or is it something else? So what I did was I put in security group 0000/0. That means open to the whole internet. So if anyone had the link of my server and tried to log in, they could, they could SSH, they could do whatever. Or actually, I was doing HTTP access, but they could, potentially have their way with my server. So I flick it on for a second, I test, and then it works. And I'm like, back to the drawing board. It's my IP. Okay, let me try and figure out my IP again. But then I switch it back off. And that's the thing. I work in security, so I'm very careful with doing something like that, because it's like it's a very dangerous move, turning it to all the zeros and then back. But this is the thing. What about when and I'm sure people on the call can empathize, or people in the audience, about if you're trying to get something to work and you're like, yeah, I'll just flip it on, or I'll just say I'll just say it's fine. I'll deal with it later. What happens if you forget about later? Something else happens. Oh no, production is down. We need to go fix that. Or oh wow, it's it's 5:30, but I'm done for the day. Or whatever happens. Human error. Sometimes people forget to switch it back to safe. And that's a real thing, because a lot of the time it's human error, and it's not even malicious. It's rarely malicious intent. That's a very small percentage of vulnerabilities and issues with production. Most of the time it's just people don't know any better. And we're starting to see that in terms of so I work for Secure Code Warrior. We do cloud security training, as well as like web, mobile, API, etc. And the most popular challenges for cloud map to this perfectly. Stuff like sensitive data storage, security misconfiguration, access control, authentication. This is what people want to learn more about, to make sure that they avoid all these pitfalls. And then the final one is insecure APIs. And this is part of a broader topic. I have a talk that I do on APIs. That's not going to talk too much, because that's another topic. But we're starting to see a lot within this space, because, okay, so we've got our different, if we're looking at REST APIs, for example, and we've got GET. And the way I think of GET, it's a bit like a read access. I just want to get the data. I just want to see it. I'm not necessarily changing it. But then you can have stuff like put, sometimes post. And normally APIs are written by people. And what I find quite interesting is, although there is a kind of standard, it's a bit, so what could be one person's put might be another. And then it's like, oh, and how am I authenticating? Do I have a token? Do I have a key? How is that stored? How can that be shared, accessed, etc.? And then also the permissions, who can do what again? So for example, IDORs, which is, I want to say insecure direct object reference. I might have got that wrong. Please don't quote me. But what it's saying is, I'm person A, and I want to see, I don't know, let's make it a normal example. I want to see my contract data. Great. But then person B logs in. Person B can see person B's contract data, but they can also see mine. That's not okay. And then you have person C, who I'm going to say is HR, and they can kind of see everything. So so this is the thing. You've got to think about who can do what and how they're doing it. That's almost, when I take it back to basics about security, I'm always talking about, let's do an audit. What's going on in the system? Can we look at, can we do a big picture so that we can spot potential weaknesses, and then we'll kind of drill down and make sure all of our links are secure, because you are as strong as your weakest link. You know, it only takes one problem to cause a bigger problem. Let's say that. And this is the thing, security is a shared responsibility. So, you know, within cloud security, guess what? If you are provisioning an environment, even if you're just having a bit of fun like me on the weekend on my own system, guess what? I need to make sure I do it securely and not open it to the internet for more than a split second as part of my testing procedure. You know, it's the same with application security. You know, I talk quite a lot about that, and I used to travel quite a bit, and we tend to say in general there's about 100 developers for each AppSec. I remember being in France a few years ago, and it was 300 developers and 1 security. And then I was on a call maybe 6 months ago, and they had about 130 developers and 2 security. And I was like, well done, you're above average. But that's the thing. How can these, you know, 1 or 2 security, and that's just security, it's not even cloud security, how can they, you know, how can they scale covering everything? And this is the thing as well, because cloud is new, it's growing, it's exciting. There's a bit of you know, a misunderstanding that cloud is easy. Cloud isn't easy, or like AWS will handle that. And it's like, well, if the data center goes on fire, yes, AWS will handle that. Back 20 years ago, if the data center was on fire, the data center might be in the basement, and probably the whole building, we need to be a bit worried. But with the, you know, with now, it's okay. If the data center's on fire, whew, that's not our problem. Well, it's a different type of problem. But what about, you know, identity access management? Who can do what? How we're storing stuff, if it's public or private, you know, secrets, keys, all of this stuff. It's really up to everyone. And do people know what they're doing? You know, I learn a lot from Google. I also learn a lot from Stack Overflow. I think everyone does, and if they deny that, I think they're denial. But obviously, I try and go to the real source for problems. But the thing is, do we have a program in place to, you know, inspire, to upskill, you know, our cloud security provisioners, help them understand, you know, why we don't want to have things as 0-0? So it's really about, you know, empowering everyone in the team, you know, upskilling them, so that they, you know, so that we don't have that one security person being overwhelmed, because they probably got a lot on their plate. You know, security isn't necessarily an easy job. So it's really about, you know, helping everyone. And I quite like this meme, because if you look at the guy at the top of the ladder, and if you were to just crop him, hey, he's doing great. He is fixing the problem. You know, if we were just to look from his trainers up and none of the rest of the picture, it's fine. Then you have your one at the bottom, and he's helping. Like, he's like, yeah, this works. This is basic physics. If we have one leg on the step and I hold the other, hey, it's stable. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And then the final one, this is actually my favorite, is the guy just who's slightly in the back on the right, because he is doing a lookout. So because they kind of all know that they shouldn't, this isn't really a safe approach. And this is the thing, a lot of the time, although security find the problem, the, you know, developers, or, you know, cloud provisioners in this case, have to fix it. So I have a different slide in another talk, but it's like developers, you know, find a way to fix the problem, because in this example, you have these 3 people who have found a way to, you know, I think they're cleaning or maybe sticking something up. And that's the thing. Just because someone's found a way, and just because it works, is it the best way? You know, what about if someone needed to walk up the stairs, or what about if the guy at the bottom got distracted? Oof, that would be quite bad. So it's definitely, you know, it's worth thinking about what's the best way, you know, and how do we scale that? How do we get everyone to have the baseline understanding for cloud security and what's good, etc. So DevOps of infrastructure as code. What we may be familiar with DevOps, you know, already. If I were to talk about a web application, So, I'm gonna do my planning even before fingers to keyboards. We're probably gonna have a little session in a room. There may be post-its, there may be pizza, who knows? But we're gonna think about the system. Then we're gonna do some coding. We're gonna run it in CI, probably Jenkins, maybe something else, and we're gonna do some testing, whether that's user acceptance or functional. If we're really cool, we're probably doing test-driven development, which is awesome. And then once our little app is ready, then we're gonna release it. It'll be out and deployed in production. And at that point, it's just about operations and monitoring. So when it comes to web, mobile, etc., most people are familiar with this. But what about for infrastructure as code? And guess what? The process is pretty much the same. Just because the code is provisioning an environment rather than, I don't know, making a mobile phone game, we still need to go through the same tests, like the same flow, because all of the best practices we've learned as part of DevOps, why not continue these? So for example, are you planning your infrastructure as code before you start typing away about your servers? Are you thinking about what you need? And also potentially, are you forward thinking? Are you thinking about scalability? Do you need it to be, do you need high availability, for example? Who's going to have access to what? Future planning, growth, etc. So it's worth obviously doing that. And then you get your coding, and then maybe you write, CloudFormation template, Terraform, maybe if you're configuring, you might do something in Ansible, for example. And then you're going to build and test. So this is really important. Are you testing your Terraform scripts? Are you really? Like, there's loads of tools out there. I'm going to come to it, I think, in the next slides. But it's really important that you do that, that you test before you just, go crazy. And then similarly, once it's out in production, it's kind of like, I think it's a little bit Inception-y, because you've got your infrastructure as code is provisioning the environment, which normally ops is responsible for. So instead of ops looking after the apps, they're also looking after the scripts that provision the environment. So it's quite meta. And this is where, as well, I kind of mentioned it kind of near the beginning, but monitoring is very, very important. Because unfortunately, touching all the wood in the world, I think there's probably some in my background. Unfortunately, we probably are all going to get hacked at some point, whether it is on a personal level, because unfortunately our bank or our airline got hacked, and then our credit card details may be at risk. And that's okay. Like, credit card details, thankfully, they can be replaced fairly easily. I worry a little bit about biometrics, because how easy is it to replace a fingerprint or eye scan if it gets hacked? Anyway, that's a different story. And also, on an organizational level, if you do get hacked, when would be a good time to figure out when? Immediately, within a few milliseconds, or okay, maybe we'll give you a minute, but instantly, within the day, because maybe you need to figure out, is this a hack, is it not? Or a few months later, because there have been exploits. There was one a couple of years ago. It was a very, very large organization. It was a bad version of Struts. But they didn't realize they got hacked for 3 months. And the initial hack was just a who am I? That was it. Because that's normally what hackers do. They do a little bit of probing. Who am I? Let's just wander around the system. And then when they understood it, they ended up stealing, I think it was like 150 million personal records, which is, I think that's about, I don't know, I think the population of America is, I can't remember, I think it's like 250 or 300 million, something around that. So most of America, in terms of, if we look at that, and for example, about 15 of the UK's, it's important to do monitoring, not only for your apps, but also for your infrastructure as code, because I think the most important thing is, do you have a process? If something bad happens, then what happens? Because something bad probably will. Touching all the wood. I don't know. Maybe I'm a skeptic, but better to be a skeptic that realizes things than an optimist that does not, for example. So the explosion of CloudSec. And when I say explosion, I do mean there's a lot going on. It's a very broad topic. I've mainly been talking about, Terraform and, for example, CloudFormation, but you have, other areas as well. So for example, CSPM, which is posture management. So that's, how are you configuring your cloud environment? Role escalation, or like my Lambda example, that's privilege escalation. How is it configured? And then you have CWPP, which is workload protection. So what's running on the cloud environment? Are there any crypto miners? And they're usually exposed. Like if you've got poor CSPM, then your CWPP, the two work in tandem. And this is the thing, if we look at some of the patterns, trends, and tooling. So there's a lot of scanning tools out there, which is awesome. So people may be familiar with some of them. Chekhov is quite famous, regular, there's TerraScan. We're starting to see as well CDK, so that's cloud development kits, such as Pulumi. And what that means, it's great. It's like abstracting even further. So you no longer need to necessarily understand Terraform or CloudFormation to write the script. You can actually start provisioning in your developer language of choice. So I think they've got like Java, Python, JavaScript, maybe a couple of others. But it's kind of giving the developers more power. And I'm an ex-developer. We love power. And we love exploring. We love trying out these cool new things. But we just need to make sure, do we know what we do? Do we know what we're doing? And this is another thing, context-aware scanning. So looking at the relationship between resources, and this can start to reduce noise and false positives. And it's what I mentioned before, around access management. We're no longer just looking at the people, all of the people who are hired by our organization. We're also looking at all of the servers, all the resources, all of the intermediaries like the Lambdas, etc. So, and this is the thing, everyone, and I should have said this before on DevOps, but everyone is on their own security journey. So if we look at the DevOps, I don't think everyone who's listening is necessarily fully DevOps. We're not like the Amazons or the Netflixes that are deploying 12 times a minute. I can't remember if it's 12 times a minute or 12 times a second, but I'm sure it will be the second one soon. And this is the thing, it can be a little bit intimidating sometimes, because if we take it back a while ago, especially with infrastructure as code, it kind of like just happened. So if we look at before, it's not like we could automate switches, or firewalls. So you've got this massive adoption, and that has massive benefits, but there is this growing complexity. So how do you stay up to date so that you don't end up like this poor person here? Because I think this is sometimes, how security feel. I was talking to a BISO about this. So that's not a CISO, but a business information security officer. And she gets requests all the time. Like, yeah, can we do this? Can we do that? Yeah, cloud is safe. Yeah, it's fine. It's like, let's verify how fine it is. We can't just label, yeah, it's fine. Security doesn't quite work like that. And this is the thing, it's not just, I've mentioned a lot of scanning tools, stuff that the vendors are doing, etc. But even the main players are doing stuff. So you have, AWS, GCP, Microsoft, there are other cloud providers as well. And they're producing stuff. So as I mentioned before, AWS changing from, the storage being from public to private by default. So as well as, all of the stuff that's going on in the vendor marketplace, you also have the providers. And, what's the best way? So, for example, I'm part of is it a mailing list? Newsletter? Anyway. And I think it's called CloudSec list. It's really good. So every Monday I get an email and it's got like, 10 or 12 articles, and it's, from kind of the industry, and there's either new releases or it's a, a Medium article that's relevant, or it's, and it's great because it's hashtagged. So for example, some might be about, CWPP or Kubernetes or whatever. And even then I have time to just scroll the newsletter, and I might click into one, maybe two if it's a slow day, but I can't read everything, and I don't think anyone can. So we really need to focus where we can, because unfortunately there's no silver bullet, but we really do not want to end up like this. We need to let's think strategically about this. So why shift left when you can start left? So my background's very much in DevSecOps, and everyone's been talking about shift left for a while. I'm hoping everyone's read the Phoenix Project and DevOps, and we kind of realized, hey, it's a lot cheaper and easier to fix stuff in, maybe in, well, not in production, that's quite expensive, but what about if we did it in CI? Ooh, so then you get loads of testing there, SAST, AST, RAST, IAST, to the point that my favorite now is I just see an XAST, so cross application security testing, which kind of lumps them all because there are so many acronyms now. And And this is the thing. So then it's like, oh, what about IDE? Does anyone have an IDE integration? Can we help developers whilst they're writing the code? It's way easier if they can fix before they commit. If they just, write it well then. And it kind of shows up in this graph. So we can see on the very far right, it's quite a big red, production post-release. It is quite expensive to fix bugs based on, detecting them at that stage. And then the further left we go, whether it's testing, CI, coding, gets quite a lot cheaper. Awesome. And then we have another one. This is a bit more confusing, so I'll talk you through this graph. So we have the dark blue line, and that is showing percentages of defects introduced. And unfortunately, most of the bugs are introduced at coding stage. And that makes sense because if you're writing your Terraform scripts or mobile app or web, when you're writing the code, that's probably when you're going to be introducing the vulnerability. So we've got a big spike of blue and then it flattens out. But when are we finding these issues? So the orange line, this is when defects are found, and we can see it kind of steadily grows as we go right. But unfortunately, the red line, which correlates to our graph on the left, then we have the cost to repair going up massively. So what does that tell us? Like, obviously, hey, let's shift left. What I'm saying is, why shift left when you can start left? And what do we mean by that? It's like, hey, why don't we inspire, users, whether it's developers, cloud provision, etc. Why don't we inspire them to have a preventative-led approach so that they can ship software, with more confidence and higher quality? Because guess what? If I'm, I'm doing stuff, got my little developer hat on, and oh no, there's a problem. Even worse, that person who quit, a few months ago, or like on maternity leave or whatever, they introduced some bugs, and that's the worst bit. It's bad enough fixing my own bugs, let alone fixing someone else's. But anyway, I don't like rework. Rework sucks. Ugh. And that's just from my perspective. That's just me as a developer. This is my persona that I am right now. But what happens if we start left? So I'm like, hey, I'm still a developer. I'm like, oh my God, this is really cool. I can learn a little bit about cloud security. I've got it bite-sized, potentially gamified. I can have some fun with it. We've got a whole awareness program. Maybe we have some like tournaments or courses, or we've got this whole global initiative to upskill ourselves. And then I'm also maybe in the back of my mind like, this is pretty awesome. I can upskill myself on the job. And then potentially, in a few years' time, when I'm making my next move, or if I want to be a senior developer, I can, take these secure coding skills. That's awesome. So, what happens? I upskill myself. And then guess what? The number of vulnerabilities drops. So if we look at the dark blue line, okay, it's a percentage. If we imagined it was an absolute number, let's say it was 85 vulnerabilities. Imagine if I could chop that down to 60 or 40, or maybe even less. I've heard of organizations dropping vulnerabilities by 80%. How awesome would that be? Because then what happens? I'm a developer. I'm happy. No more rework. No more fixing my bugs or anyone else's bugs. And then guess what? My engineering manager was like, "Oh, Steph, you're doing some great work at the moment. Good job. Have a promotion. Have a pay rise." Yes. But also security. They're like, "Oh, amazing!" Because what will happen is all the application security testing tools are going to run a lot smoother. So this orange line, okay, I know it's a percentage, but imagine if it was absolute numbers, it will just drop because we're not introducing as many bugs. And then even the pen testers. So pen testers might get a bit bored. We've been talking about SQL injection since 1998. So they probably get to the point where they're like, another one of these bugs, which is actually the backstory of Secure Code Warrior. Our CEO was a pen tester, and I think that was part of his motive for founding the company. But what we have as pen testers, you can now focus on way more fun, complicated stuff. I worked with an organization who had pen testers, and they were using a SAS tool, and they would take their SAS results to the pen testers and say, do not look for these. We know about these. Find something else. So then all of a sudden you have happier pen testers, happier security, happier engineering managers, happier developers, lower attrition everywhere. And we're talking about all this happiness, but also less vulnerabilities in our code base, potentially in production. So we end up with, less chance of being exploited, which is awesome. So cloud security training within an optimal security program. And the thing is, before I even start, well, I will start, but what is an optimal security program? And this is the thing. It's very subjective because we are all on our own journey. It was a bit like, the DevOps flow. Are we all fully DevOps? No, probably not. Do we want to be there? Probably yes. And it's the same with security. I speak to organizations on a daily basis, and sometimes they have everything in place. They've got all of the different security checkpoints at each stage, multiple code checks. They've got pen testers. They've got an empowered security team. They've got, a security training, rollout program. They've got everything. And then sometimes I speak to people and they're like, oh yeah, we're using some of the OWASP tools, some of the free ones, because they're awesome. I'm not negating that, but they haven't quite got to the point where they've got a full control of their security portfolio. And that's the thing. That's why I usually start with, because I'm like, I'm not going to tell you about a silver bullet, but do an audit. What type of organization are you? Are you doing? Are you finance? Are you tech? Are you government? What does that mean? And then where are your potential weaknesses? What apps are out there on the internet? For example, open source software licenses. There are different rules. Sometimes you really don't want to be distributing stuff. Sometimes it's totally okay. And that's it. It depends when you're distributing stuff. If I wrote a little app which we use on Fridays, and it's almost like it's like a random number generator, and it's like, hey, who's gonna make tea, or who's in charge of organizing the delivery order for team lunch, that kind of thing, and then it pops up with someone's face, like, it's this person. But if I use a bad license, does it really matter? Because that's not being used anywhere. It's not out on the internet. It's literally between my team of 4 of us, and it only runs on my computer. Can we be a bit more relaxed? Probably. If it was our mobile phone app and it was maybe internet banking and had sensitive information, obviously money, and it is distributed, yes, let's definitely drill down on that. But my little phone app, my little lunch app, we can be a bit more careful. So that's the thing. Establish, your tier 1 or even tier 0 apps, the apps that if they went down, the business, it's a big problem. How are they doing? And this is the thing. Cloud can sometimes be one of those apps, because if you think about how much we have on the cloud, whether we're hosting our applications, hosting our servers, hosting our data, that's pretty high up there. And are we upskilling our team? Do they know what they're doing? Do they know best practices? Think back to my image of the 3 guys on the 3 guys and the ladder. There was only one on the ladder. Maybe there's another one anyway. But how are we? Developers will find a way. And so, if someone wants to get an environment up and running, they'll find a way. A bit like me flicking my 0 on and off. But is that the best way? And you sometimes see this as well in comments. Like, I was talking with someone recently, and it was bug bounty. So it was on the flip side, ethical hackers. But you can find a lot of stuff in comments, because sometimes people will put comments in, and there are instances where you have the comment and maybe it has something sensitive, and someone else comments saying, remember to remove this before we go live, and then that ends up in production. Oops. So this is the thing. You need to really, think about, do your audit. How is your security, posture? And also, are you training? Are you training the right people? It's great to focus. Yeah, we're just going to do the security champions, and that will disseminate. The knowledge will just, that's the way it works. But actually, what you'll find is you're going to have some users that are really, really clever and really good and really, I either say passionate or paranoid about security. I used to be passionate. Now I am fully paranoid. And then you're going to have probably your juniors, or maybe people that aren't motivated, but people kind of at the other end. And there aren't going to be very many of these, but the people in the middle, that's where you're going to have a lot of people. It's like a normal curve. So why don't we address them? Are we inspiring and upskilling every developer or every, cloud security provisioner? Anyone who has access to the cloud, who might be able to do stuff, do they know what they're doing? Have they been trained sufficiently? So it's really worth, investing in that, because not only is it, will it fix the problem by starting left? It's also good for, people. If I feel invested in, I'm, much less chance of attrition. But all I can say is caveat that with, within your optimal security program, because the thing is, complexity is growing. Hey, 20 years ago, can you imagine if I talked about, everyone's going to be, all the banks, all the governments, everyone, it's just all going to be Google's going to have everything, or Amazon, etc. It's going to be in the cloud. People think I was crazy. I remember seeing, I think it was like a Dilbert equivalent. So there's little kind of cartoons, and it was two executives, so in a suit like this. And one of them had a filing cabinet. So yeah, remember those filing cabinets? And they were using like a slingshot, and they were just slingshotting. They're on a hill, and they were slingshotting this filing cabinet. And one of them's like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Oh yeah, we're moving our data to the cloud." And I think that's sometimes what people thought. They're like, "What are we doing?" Now it's more acceptable, but complexity is growing. Cloud security is everywhere, or cloud is everywhere, and cloud security solutions are everywhere. So it's really trying to drill down and kind of understand. So to summarize, did a little bit of a history lesson, talked about the growth of cloud, how it's ubiquitous, even my mum knows what it is, and how, as Voltaire or Ben Parker said, with great power comes great security vulnerabilities. So hopefully we've learned that security is a shared responsibility. If we can empower, if we can delegate, if we can make everyone just 1% better, that will make the one security person, or one to 100, job a lot easier. And when we're looking at infrastructure as code, we can use the same DevOps methodologies. When it comes to the explosion of CloudSec, there is a lot going on. So, find out what's relevant for you. Like I keep saying, let's empower our teams to do the right thing. And when you are, ideally you want to start left. Don't really want to start right. If you have to start in the middle, shift left, then start left. But, if the graph showed you anything, it's a lot cheaper when you start left. And finally, focusing on training within an optimal security program. So thank you so much for listening. It's been great talking to you all. My name is Stefania Chaplin, Solutions Architect at Secure Code Warrior. You can find me on Twitter, DevStepOps. I'm also on YouTube, DevStepOps, and even on Instagram, DevStepOps. That's where I put all my tech memes. So yeah, feel free to follow on any of my channels, also LinkedIn, got my email here. And thank you so much for your time.